Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take the ideas you're curious about, dive into some really fascinating source material, and, well, basically give you the inside track so you're genuinely clued in.
And today, we're tackling something pretty fundamental.
Yeah, we really are. We're looking deep into the architecture of human feelings, the actual mechanics behind our emotions.
It's definitely a critical topic, and looking at the research you shared, it's obvious that this whole area, the mechanics of emotion, it's probably one of the most misunderstood parts of being human, but it affects everything.
It really does. It feels like we've been given the keys,
Yeah.
to the engine room of how we make decisions, how we react. I wanted to kick things off with this great little story and anecdote from the sources because it just perfectly shows the surprising power of emotional competence.
Well,
It's about this Madison Avenue bus driver in New York.
Yeah.
This was like maybe 20 years before the research we're looking at was done. Anyway, he's stuck in that awful NYC gridlock.
yeah,
Total standstill.
right. And the passengers, probably not happy. Yeah.
Exactly. Sullen, irritable, that classic big city impatience vibe. Everyone's just radiating frustration.
Yeah, that simmering anger, ready to boil over. I know it well.
But this driver, he didn't get sucked into it. Instead, he starts this kind of running commentary, just talking about things he sees outside the window.
Like what?
Oh, hey, look at that sale over there. Or did you see that new museum exhibit? Heard it's amazing. Or you absolutely have to catch this movie tonight. Just genuinely pointing out cool stuff.
Huh. So not complaining about the traffic.
Not at all. He wasn't putting on an act. It was this genuine delight in the city. And it was infectious.
I can imagine. So what happened?
By the time people started getting off the bus, the whole mood had shifted. That sullenness, gone. People were actually smiling, chatting a bit.
Wow. So he basically just changed the emotional weather on the bus.
Pretty much. He was doing this high-level emotional work, like an urban peacemaker, turning bad vibes into good feelings. And the kicker is, he was doing this 20 years before psychology really had the word or the science to explain how he did it.
That's fascinating. He was intuitively using emotional intelligence.
Exactly. And that's the mechanism we're going to unpack today. Our mission here is to really analyze the science behind it all,
Yeah.
the structure, and how this other intelligence, emotional intelligence, or EQ, actually works in the real world.
Right. Because a core argument in all this material, and it's a challenging one, is that traditional intelligence, IQ.
Yeah.
It's often a surprisingly poor predictor of how well someone does in life. Especially, and this is a direct quote from the sources, when intellect can come to nothing when the emotions hold sway.
Right. Intellect isn't enough when your feelings take over. That sets the stage perfectly.
Okay, so first things first, we probably need to address a pretty fundamental issue with how we see ourselves. We call our species Homo sapiens, the thinking species.
Sounds about right. Wise man, thinking man.
Well, the sources argue that this label is actually quite misleading. Our emotional system, how fast our feelings react, the urgency of them, it's often still wired for the Pleistocene.
Like running from saber-toothed tigers.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fighting off attackers, immediate survival threats. That's the kind of quick trigger response system we inherited.
But we're not dealing with saber-toothed tigers anymore. We're dealing with, difficult colleagues or social media drama, or just feeling anxious about the future.
Precisely. We're facing these complex postmodern problems with an emotional toolkit designed for the savannah. And that mismatch, that disconnect, is huge.
Okay, so that explains why just being really smart, having a high IQ, doesn't automatically mean you'll have a successful life, or even a stable one.
It really doesn't. If you actually look at the statistics, what determines where someone ends up in society, their job status, how much they earn, their overall happiness IQ, it only accounts for about 20% of those factors.
Wait, hang on. Only 20%.
Yep, just 20%.
Wow. That leaves 80% determined by, what did the sources call them? Other forces.
Other forces, exactly. And think about it. We pour so much energy and money globally into boosting that 20% academic skills test scores.
Right. Education systems are built around it.
But we largely ignore the other 80%. And that 80% often dictates whether that IQ, that intellect, ever actually gets used effectively.
That really puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
And it explains those stories you hear, the anecdotes of really smart people just not making it.
Yeah, the sources mention a few striking examples, like this one student at Amherst College, absolutely brilliant on paper, 5 perfect 800 scores on his SATs and achievement tests, just off the charts intellect.
Okay, so a genius by any standard measure.
Totally. But what happened when he got to college? Despite all that raw brain power, he basically just hung out,
Yeah.
missed classes, couldn't manage his time, couldn't prioritize his work.
So the intelligence was there, but the follow-through wasn't.
Exactly. His self-management skills were lacking. And it took him almost 10 years just to get his undergraduate degree. His high IQ gave him zero defense against his inability to actually, function day-to-day within the system.
That's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? All that potential, limited, not by understanding, but by managing himself. And it's not just in school, right? There was that Harvard study, too.
Oh, yeah, the big longitudinal study. They followed Harvard grads from the 1940s well into middle age.
What did they find?
Same pattern. The guys with the absolute highest test scores in college, they weren't necessarily the ones who ended up at the highest salaries, or being the most productive, or having the highest status jobs later on.
So top grades didn't equal top careers. What about, like, personal life? Happiness?
Nope. High IQ didn't predict greater life satisfaction or happiness in their relationships either. Nothing.
It really seems like the people who excel purely by academic measures, the valedictorians, the ones who are great at getting good grades.
Yeah, they thrive in that structured, narrow environment.
But when they hit the real world, with all its messiness, the vicissitudes of life, as the source puts it, careers, relationships, setbacks, they can really struggle.
It makes sense because IQ just measures a specific narrow set of skills, like verbal ability, math skills, memory.
Right.
But emotional aptitude, this EQ stuff, the sources present it as a kind of meta-ability. Think of it like the operating system for all your other talents.
Okay, like the software that runs the hardware.
Kind of, yeah. It doesn't matter how good the hardware, your intellect, your skills is. Your EQ determines how well you actually use those skills. Whether you're a genius or just average, EQ is what allows you to deploy your abilities effectively.
Okay, so if we want to really get why IQ sometimes counts for so little when emotions run high, we need to look at the brain itself. The sources talk about us having essentially two brains, two minds.
That's a key concept. It's this dual system we all have. There's the rational mind that's seated more in the neocortex, the thinking part of the brain. It's thoughtful, it reflects, it plans.
Our inner Mr. Spock.
Yeah, something like that. But then operating right alongside it is the emotional mind. And this one is impulsive, incredibly powerful, and sometimes, well, frankly, it can be pretty illogical.
And the relationship between them.
The crucial dynamic is intensity. The stronger the feeling, fear, anger, even intense joy, the more the emotional mind takes over. When those emotions spike, the rational mind just loses its grip.
Which leads to what the experts call an emotional hijacking.
Exactly. And the source material gives some really unsettling examples of how this primitive system can just completely override our rational thought. Remember that story about the 14-year-old girl, Matilda Crabtree?
Oh, yeah, that was awful. She was just playing a prank, right? Hiding in a closet to jump out and scare her parents.
Yeah, a silly, childish joke. She jumps out late at night, yells, "Boo!" Her father, jolted awake from a deep sleep.
Reacts instantly.
Instantly. His brain goes into full-on threat mode. It's that immediate precognitive alarm response. And because speed overrides accuracy in that moment, tragedy strikes. The emotional brain acted before the rational brain could assess the situation.
It shows how fast that primitive response is.
Yeah.
And then there was the other case, Richard Robles, the burglar. That was different, though, wasn't it? More complex.
It was. He was an experienced burglar. He broke into an apartment. But then one of the women inside threatened him, said she'd remember his face, track him down.
And he panicked.
Completely panicked. He described it later as his head just exploding. It was this frenzy of rage and fear of getting caught, rage at the threat. He grabbed a bottle, attacked the women, stabbed them.
So it wasn't a planned murder, it was.
It was an emotional hijacking. A total loss of control driven by that raw fear and anger, triggered by the immediate threat of identification.
And this extreme loss of control, it originates from a specific part of the brain, right? This tiny little structure.
That's right, the amygdala. It's the small, almond-shaped cluster of neurons deep inside the temporal lobes. Think of it as the brain's dedicated alarm company.
Always scanning for danger.
Constantly scanning sensory input for any hint of a threat. And when it spots one, bang, it sends out urgent emergency signals to basically every major part of the brain.
Triggering the fight or flight response.
The whole cascade floods the system with stress hormones like norepinephrine, jacks up your heart rate, makes your senses hyper alert, even physically changes your facial expression to show fear or anger, gets your muscles ready for action. all in an instant.
But the really groundbreaking stuff, the research by Joseph Ledoux, it showed how these signals travel, right? The pathway itself is key.
Absolutely critical. So sensory information comes into the brain via the thalamus. That's like the main relay station. From the thalamus, one path goes to the neocortex for thinking, but another path shoots directly across a single synapse, just one connection straight to the amygdala.
Bypassing the thinking part.
Bypassing the neocortex entirely. This is the emergency route. It means the amygdala gets the information and triggers an emotional response before the neocortex, the rational brain, has had a chance to fully process what's happening and make a reasoned judgment.
Wow. So we're literally built to react emotionally first, think second. That feels counterintuitive for Homo sapiens.
Well, it's great for immediate survival.
Yeah.
Don't pause to analyze if the rustling is a predator, just run. But yes, it means the emotional mind gets priority, often at the expense of accuracy. Ledoux proved this with rats.
How so?
He paired a specific sound tone with an electric shock. The rats quickly learned to fear the tone, but here's the thing. Even when he surgically destroyed their auditory cortex, the part of the brain that consciously hears the sound, they still reacted with fear to the tone.
So the amygdala was hearing it directly.
Essentially, yes. The sound went from the ear to the thalamus straight to the amygdala via that shortcut. The amygdala perceived the threat, remembered the association with the shock, and orchestrated the fear response, all without involving the higher thinking auditory pathways.
That's an incredibly efficient, it's sometimes problematic design.
Oh.
So normally, isn't the front part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, supposed to keep this system in check?
It is. Under normal circumstances, the prefrontal lobes act like the executive manager. They plan, they organize thoughts, and they put the brakes on the amygdala's impulsive signals, like a parent calming down a frantic child.
But during an emotional hijacking,
During a hijacking, the amygdala's alarm signal is so strong, so intense, that it overwhelms the prefrontal cortex. Either the manager doesn't step in quickly enough, or its attempts to regulate are just drowned out by the emotional flood. Sometimes the prefrontal cortex even gets recruited to help rationalize the emotional reaction after the fact.
okay, this brings us right back to why EQ is so important, even for just thinking clearly. Strong emotions, anxiety, anger, extreme stress.
They create what neuroscientists call neural static right in the prefrontal cortex.
Viral static, like interference.
Exactly. This static actively disrupts what's called working memory. That's your mental scratch pad, your ability to hold information in mind, manipulate it, focus, and make decisions. It's essential for any kind of complex thought or learning.
So when you're really upset or anxious, and you have that feeling of, I just can't think straight.
That's not just a feeling, it's literally what's happening in your brain. The emotional noise is clogging up the circuits your rational mind needs to function effectively. Your mental bandwidth is just overloaded.
All right, so we've seen the brain's wiring, how emotions can hijack reason. Now let's look at the skills that help us manage this system. Peter Salovey, a psychologist at Yale, he mapped out these 5 core areas, these domains that bring intelligence to our emotions.
That's right. And these 5 domains, self-awareness, managing emotions, self-motivation, empathy, and handling relationships, they build on each other. They're like the fundamental building blocks for navigating life effectively.
And the absolute foundation, the starting point for everything else, is self-awareness, knowing yourself. Socrates was onto something.
He really was. Self-awareness isn't just having feelings. It's the active, ongoing attention to your own internal states. It's the crucial difference between just being, say, angry and recognizing, oh, I'm feeling angry right now.
Being the observer of your own emotions rather than just being swept away by them.
Exactly. And when this skill is severely lacking, you get a condition called alexithymia. It was coined back in '72. People with alexithymia, they really struggle to put their feelings into words.
So they feel bad, but they don't know why.
Pretty much. They might feel this vague, befuddling bundle of distress, as the source puts it. They might be crying or have physical tension, but if you ask them what they're feeling, they can't name it, maybe just uncomfortable or stressed.
And that must make it impossible to deal with the feeling if you can't even identify it. I read they often look for physical causes instead.
Very often. They might go to doctors complaining of headaches or stomach problems, searching for a medical diagnosis because they can't articulate the underlying emotional distress like anxiety or sadness. If you can't label it, you can't manage it.
And this self-awareness, it's not just about managing negative feelings, right? It connects to making good decisions too. Like that story about Elliot, the lawyer.
Oh yeah, Damasio's famous patient. Elliot was a successful corporate lawyer. He had surgery for a brain tumor right in his frontal lobes. Afterwards, his IQ was fine. She tested brilliantly on cognitive tests.
But his life fell apart.
Completely. He made disastrous financial decisions, lost his job, his marriage failed. Why? Because the surgery had damaged the connection between his thinking brain and his emotional centers. He lost the ability to feel his way through decisions.
He couldn't feel which choice was better.
He couldn't. He could logically analyze the pros and cons endlessly. Apparently, he'd spend hours debating trivial things like which pen to use or where to park. But because he had no emotional gut feeling, no sense of preference or warning, he was paralyzed. He'd lost access to what Damasio calls somatic markers.
Somatic markers.
Yeah.
Gut feelings, basically.
Essentially, yes. Those physical sensations. The knot in your stomach, the quickening pulse that your body generates in response to different options, they're not mystical. They're signals from your emotional brain, your accumulated life wisdom, telling you steer clear or this feels right.
So pure logic isn't enough for complex decisions like who to trust or what job to take.
Absolutely not. You need that emotional wisdom, that gut sense. And self-awareness is the key to recognizing and interpreting those internal signals.
Okay, so once you're aware of your emotions, the next step is managing emotions or self-regulation. Knowing you're angry is one thing, doing something constructive with it is another.
Right. And one of the biggest myths here is the idea of catharsis, that venting your anger makes it go away.
Yeah, like punching a pillow or yelling. Doesn't that help?
Actually, no. Research by Dolph Zillman showed the opposite. Venting, whether it's yelling or being aggressive, actually pumps up the arousal in your emotional brain. It fuels the fire.
So it makes the anger last longer.
Exactly. It prolongs the hostile mood, sometimes for hours. You're basically rehearsing being angry.
So what does work?
Cooling down first. You need to let the physiological arousal subside, which can take 20 minutes or more. Then, once you're calmer, you can address the issue constructively. Distraction is also really effective.
How does distraction help?
Because it breaks the cycle of angry thoughts. If you keep replaying the argument in your head, you keep re-triggering the anger. But if you distract yourself, watch TV, read a book, go for a walk, you interrupt that angry train of thought, giving your brain a chance to reset.
Makes sense. What about managing other difficult emotions like anxiety, worrying?
Chronic worry is a tough one. It's essentially a mental rehearsal of potential bad things happening, and Thomas Borkowicz's research suggests it becomes self-perpetuating.
How so?
Because if you worry intensely about something awful, like your plane crashing and then it doesn't happen, your brain mistakenly gives the worry credit for preventing the disaster. See? Worrying worked, so you keep doing it.
That's a tricky loop. How do you break it?
It takes self-awareness, again, catching yourself in the worry cycle. Then, actively challenging the worrisome thoughts, generating skeptical, alternative possibilities, questioning how likely the feared outcome really is.
Okay. And managing sadness or melancholy.
Healthy sadness has a purpose. It makes us slow down, reflect, process a loss. But it backfires when people either isolate themselves completely or when they get together with others only to ruminate, to endlessly talk about how bad they feel. That just deepens the funk.
So what's the better approach?
Again, distraction can be key, but the type matters. You need distractions that genuinely shift your mood upwards, an absorbing book, a funny movie, engaging in a hobby, physical activity, something that pulls your focus away from the sad thoughts and introduces positive feelings.
Moving on to the third domain, self-motivation. This covers drive, persistence, optimism.
And this is where we see one of the most powerful demonstrations of EQ in action, the marshmallow test.
Ah, yes, the classic Stanford study from the 60s. Everyone should know about this one.
Absolutely foundational. They took 4-year-old kids, put them in a room with a marshmallow and said, you can eat this now, or if you wait until I come back in about 15-20 minutes, you can have 2 marshmallows.
A test of delayed gratification, pure impulse control.
Exactly. And the really amazing part was the follow-up years later. They tracked these kids down when they were adolescents, about to take their SATs.
And what did they find?
The ability to resist that marshmallow at age 4 was a dramatically better predictor of their eventual SAT scores than their IQ scores measured at age 4.
Get out. How much better?
Twice as powerful. The kids who waited patiently scored, on average, 210 points higher on the combined SAT than the kids who grabbed the marshmallow right away.
210 points. That's staggering. All from waiting for a marshmallow.
It really is. But it wasn't just about test scores. As teenagers, those high layers were also rated as more socially competent, more self-reliant, better able to handle stress, more confident, more dependable. It shows that managing your impulses isn't just about being good, it's fundamental to competence in life.
And this drive, this self-motivation, it also connects to optimism, right? How you explain setbacks to yourself.
Definitely. Martin Seligman's work on explanatory style is key here. Optimism isn't just wishful thinking.
It's about how you interpret failure.
Exactly. Optimists tend to see failure or setbacks as temporary, specific, and due to something they can change, like not trying hard enough or needing a better strategy. Pessimists see setbacks as permanent, pervasive, and due to some personal failing they can't fix.
And this has real-world consequences, like in sales.
Huge consequences. That Met life insurance study is famous for a reason. They tested new salespeople for optimism. The optimists sold 37% more insurance in their first 2 years than the pessimists.
37%. Wow.
And even more telling, the pessimists quit their jobs at twice the rate of the optimists. When faced with rejection, which happens all the time in sales, the optimists thought, okay, bad call, on to the next, while the pessimists thought, I'm terrible at this, I'll never succeed. That internal narrative makes all the difference.
And this leads to the idea of flow, right? That state of being totally absorbed.
Yes, Csikszentmihalyi's concept of flow. It's that optimal state of engagement where you're completely immersed in an activity. Time flies, you feel challenged but not overwhelmed.
Like an athlete in the zone or a musician lost in the music.
Exactly. It happens when the challenge of the task is perfectly balanced with your skill level just slightly stretching your abilities. If it's too easy, you're bored. If it's too hard, you're anxious. Flow is that sweet spot in between.
What's happening in the brain during flow?
Csikszentmihalyi talks about cortical efficiency. Your brain is working incredibly effectively, but with minimal effort. It's highly focused, but relaxed. This state is intrinsically rewarding. It makes hard work feel good, even refreshing, and it's a powerful driver for mastering skills.
Okay, so we've covered self-awareness, self-management, self-motivation. Now we shift outwards to understanding others. Domain 4, empathy.
Empathy is fundamentally about understanding others' feelings, and a huge part of that is reading nonverbal cues, tone of voice, facial expressions, body language. Often, the nonverbal message tells the real story.
Like in that PONS test you mentioned, Profile of Nonverbal Sensitivity.
Right. Robert Rosenthal developed that test. It measures how well people can read emotions when the communication channels are limited. Maybe they only see a fleeting facial expression or only hear muffled words but can gauge the tone. Some people are just much better at tuning into those subtle signals than others.
And empathy develops really early, doesn't it?
Incredibly early. Even infants show what's called sympathetic distress. They cry just because they hear another baby crying. They're literally feeling the other's distress.
But they don't understand it's someone else's feeling yet.
Not quite. By about age 1, toddlers start to realize the distress belongs to someone else, but their attempts to help are often egocentric. Like, a 1-year-old might see a friend crying and go get his own mother to comfort the friend because his mom comforts him.
Aw, that's sweet though. How does this develop further? Parenting must play a huge role.
A massive role. How parents discipline makes a big difference. If a child misbehaves and the parent focuses on the impact on the other person, look how sad you made Sarah feel. Why do you think she's crying? That builds empathy.
Versus just saying, that was naughty, go to your room.
Exactly. The first approach encourages the child to consider the other person's perspective and feelings. The second just focuses on rules and punishment.
And the flip side, the failure of empathy, that can be really disturbing. The sources talk about criminals, psychopaths.
Yeah, the lack of empathy is a hallmark of psychopathy and sociopathy. These individuals can commit incredibly cruel acts with absolutely no remorse, no feeling for their victims' suffering.
It's like they just don't register other people's pain.
The theory is there might be a neurological disconnect. They might understand the word pain intellectually, but the emotional circuits that would normally attach a feeling of distress or aversion to that concept are faulty. So the victim's suffering is just data. It doesn't stop them.
Chilling. Okay, final domain, number 5, handling relationships or social skills. This is about managing emotions in others, right?
It is. It builds on empathy. It's about using your understanding of others' emotions and your own self-management skills to interact effectively, persuade, lead, negotiate, settle disputes. And a key mechanism here is emotional contagion.
Moods are contagious, like catching a cold.
Pretty much. When people interact, there's a constant, subtle exchange of emotion. We unconsciously mimic facial expressions, posture, tone of voice. Ulf Dimberg's research showed tiny facial muscles firing in subjects just looking at pictures of happy or angry faces. This leads to mood synchrony.
So you start to feel what the other person is feeling.
To some extent, yes. And when that synchrony is positive, when you both land on a similar, generally good emotional wavelength, that's rapport, that smooth, effortless connection you feel with some people.
And this sounds like the adult version of what mothers do with babies, that attunement thing.
Exactly like that. Daniel Stern's work with videotaping mothers and infants was groundbreaking. He showed this constant dance of attunement. The mother isn't just mimicking the baby, she's matching the feeling behind the action.
How so? Like an example.
So, if the baby gives an excited little squeal, the mother might respond with a similar pitch in her voice or a little shimmy that matches the baby's burst of energy. It happens subtly, maybe once a minute or so.
And this tells the baby.
I feel you. I understand your internal state. We're connected. It's incredibly reassuring and vital for emotional development. And the lack of it. The sources link it to devastating outcomes.
Like with the violent criminals mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it was noted that many individuals who committed the most brutal crimes had backgrounds of severe emotional neglect, maybe shuffled between foster homes, lacking that consistent, attuned caregiver in early life. That early lack of connection makes it incredibly difficult to form healthy relationships later on.
Okay, so these 5 domains clearly cover a lot of ground for personal well-being. But let's talk about where the rubber really meets the road, high-stakes situations,
Yeah.
like our physical health. We used to talk about type A personality being bad for the heart.
Right, that hurried, workaholic, competitive type. But the research has refined that considerably. It's not just being driven or busy that's the problem. The truly toxic ingredient is hostility.
Hostility, you mean like cynicism, anger, mistrust?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That tendency to be easily angered, to view others with suspicion, to make cynical comments or lash out. That's the real heart risk. There is this incredible study of physicians.
Yeah.
They assessed their hostility levels way back in medical school. Decades later, the doctors who had scored highest on hostility were 7 times more likely to have died by age 50 than those who scored lowest.
7 times. That's enormous. More predictive than smoking or high blood pressure.
Stronger predictor than any of those standard physical risk factors. It's shocking, but it shows the power of chronic negative emotion.
What's it doing to the body? How does anger physically harm the heart?
Anger and hostility basically make the heart work much harder and much less efficiently. They trigger that fight or flight response, dumping stress hormones, constricting blood vessels, increasing blood pressure. One Harvard study found that for people who already had heart disease, being angry actually more than doubled their risk of having a cardiac arrest within the next 2 hours.
Wow. The body really does keep the score. And this links to the immune system too, right? Stress makes you more likely to get sick.
Absolutely. Sheldon Cohen did that classic study. He got volunteers, measured their stress levels, how much hassle and pressure they felt in their lives, and then deliberately exposed them all to a common cold virus.
And waited to see who got sick.
Exactly. The results were crystal clear. Among the people reporting the least stress, only 27% actually developed a cold, but among those reporting the most stress, 47% got sick.
Nearly double the rate.
Yep. It's direct evidence that psychological stress, or really the poor management of it, weakens the immune system's ability to fight off invaders.
But there's a positive side too. The sources talked about the healing power of support. That Stanford breast cancer study was just incredible.
Dr. David Spiegel's work, yes. It's truly remarkable. He took women with advanced metastatic breast cancer, women considered terminal. Half just received standard medical care. The other half received standard care, plus they attended a weekly emotional support group.
Just a support group where they talked about their feelings.
Pretty much a safe space where they could share their fears, their pain, their anger, connect with others going through the same thing, feel understood and supported.
And the outcome.
The women in the support groups lived, on average, almost twice as long as the women who only got standard medical care. They lived an average of 37 months after diagnosis, compared to just 19 months for the control group.
That's astounding. 18 extra months of life from emotional connection.
If that were a drug, it would be a multi-billion-dollar blockbuster. It just powerfully underscores how much our emotional state and our social connections influence our physical health, even in the face of devastating illness.
Let's shift to the workplace. EQ seems crucial there too, especially around feedback and teamwork. That distinction between criticism and critique.
Ah, yes, the artful critique versus destructive criticism. This is huge for managers, for colleagues, for anyone giving feedback. Destructive criticism is personal. It attacks the person. You're incompetent. You always mess this up. It often involves sarcasm, anger, blanket judgments.
And the result is the person just gets defensive, right? They shut down.
Totally. It triggers that emotional hijacking we talked about. They feel attacked, resentful, and they certainly aren't open to learning or improving.
So the artful critique is different how?
It follows specific principles rooted in empathy. First, be specific. Focus on the action or the work, not the person's character. Second, offer a solution or a way forward. Don't just point out the problem. Third, deliver it privately and face-to-face to preserve dignity. And fourth, do it with sensitivity. Acknowledge that feedback can be difficult to hear. Show you understand their perspective.
That sounds like it requires a lot more skill than just venting frustration.
It does. And this kind of skill is often what separates the star performers from the average ones, even in highly technical fields, like that study at Bell Labs with the engineers.
Right. They were all brilliant engineers, high IQs across the board.
Exactly. Academically, they were peers. But the stars, the top 10% who were seen as most valuable and productive, weren't necessarily smarter. The difference was their emotional intelligence.
What specifically did they do differently?
They were better at motivating themselves, obviously, but crucially, they were masters of the informal organization. They knew how to build and leverage their networks.
Networks? You mean who knows what?
Yes, networks of expertise, communication networks, but most importantly, trust networks. You might be technically brilliant, but if people don't trust you, if they see you as difficult or unreliable, they won't come to you. They won't collaborate effectively. The stars built rapport and trust. That's pure EQ.
And EQ is also critical for handling diversity and bias in the workplace. The Denny's example was striking.
Yeah, that lawsuit highlighted how unconscious, subtle biases held by individuals can lead to systemic discrimination across a whole organization.
The sources seem pretty realistic about this, saying it's hard to just eliminate deep-seated prejudice overnight.
It is. Prejudice is often a form of emotional learning, ingrained early on. It's often easier to change someone's intellectual belief than their deep-seated feeling about a group.
So what's the practical approach for organizations?
The focus should be on changing behavior and organizational norms. You might not be able to instantly change every heart and mind, but you can make biased behavior unacceptable. Clear policies, training, and leadership making it absolutely clear that discriminatory actions won't be tolerated. That changes the culture, which in turn suppresses the expression of bias. Even if the underlying feeling hasn't completely vanished in everyone, it's about managing the expression.
It's so clear from the research that this emotional learning starts really, really early. The family crucible, as the sources call it. That's the first school for learning how to manage feelings and understand others. That story about Carl and Anne and their daughter Leslie playing the video game was, well, it was tough to read.
It really illustrates the negative side perfectly. They were trying to help their 5-year-old daughter win the game, but they were just shouting conflicting instructions at her. Go right, no left, stop, faster.
And they were totally oblivious to her actual state.
Completely. They were so focused on the task winning the game that they didn't even notice she was getting overwhelmed, starting to cry softly, trying to wipe away tears.
So the lesson Leslie learned wasn't how to play the game, it was
that her feelings didn't matter. That when she felt distressed, her parents either ignored it or just piled on more pressure. That's a terrible foundation for emotional competence.
So what's the alternative? Parents acting as emotional coaches.
Exactly. These are parents who see their child's negative emotions not as misbehavior or something to be squashed, but as an opportunity for connection and teaching. They acknowledge the feeling, wow, you seem really angry right now. Try to understand its source, validate it. It's okay to feel angry when your brother takes your toy, and then help the child find better ways to cope or express it.
Like, instead of hitting, how about we stomp our feet or punch this pillow?
Precisely. Guiding them towards more constructive ways to manage the emotional energy.
And the benefits of this coaching style, they're pretty significant, right?
Huge. Kids raised by emotional coaches are demonstrably better at handling their own emotions. They can soothe themselves more effectively when upset. And this is interesting. They tend to be more popular with their peers.
More popular. Why?
Probably because they're better at understanding and responding to other kids' emotions too. They also show fewer behavior problems, are physically more relaxed. They actually have lower levels of stress hormones. And get this, even controlling for IQ, these kids had higher achievement scores in math and reading by 3rd grade.
Wow. So emotional coaching in the home actually boosts academic performance down the line.
It seems so. It sets them up for success in multiple ways.
But despite knowing this, the sources paint a pretty grim picture of the overall emotional state of kids today. This crisis in childhood.
Yeah, the data is concerning. Large-scale studies across many countries show a consistent trend. Compared to previous generations, children today are reportedly more lonely, more depressed, more anxious, angrier, more impulsive, and more aggressive.
And the stats back that up. Things like suicide rates.
Disturbingly so. In the U.S., for example, teen suicide rates tripled over a few decades leading up to the research, and rates of teens arrested for murder quadrupled in some periods. And this isn't just tied to poverty. This decline in emotional well-being seems to cut across all socioeconomic levels. It's a widespread trend. It points to a real societal deficit in teaching these skills. But the brain can relearn, right? Even after trauma. That section on PTSD was hopeful.
Yes, understanding emotional relearning from trauma is key. Post-traumatic stress disorder, like in the kids who witnessed that horrific school shooting in Stockton.
Their brains became rewired by the trauma. They developed hypervigilance, always on edge. Any little thing that reminded them of the event, a loud noise, even a certain game they played that day, could trigger intense fear, flashbacks. The trauma essentially interferes with subsequent learning because the fear pathways become so deeply etched.
The amygdala hijacking becomes instantaneous for related triggers.
Exactly. But recovery is possible. It involves relearning, essentially extinguishing the conditioned fear response. This requires the prefrontal cortex, the thinking brain, to gradually regain control and learn to inhibit the amygdala's automatic alarm signals in response to those triggers.
So the brain is plastic. Emotional habits, even deeply ingrained traumatic ones, can be changed.
They can, but it often takes deliberate therapeutic work. It demonstrates that emotional learning and relearning is possible throughout life.
Which brings us to the big solution proposed. Putting EQ in schools. Teaching emotional literacy systematically.
This is presented almost as a form of psychological inoculation, a preventative measure that could address the roots of many problems, aggression, depression, substance abuse, before they fully develop.
And these aren't just fuzzy feel-good classes, right? They're structured, like that self-science example.
Right. Very practical. Fifth graders starting the class by simply rating their feelings on a 1 to 10 scale. That builds basic self-awareness and a common language. Then they engage in activities designed to practice skills.
Like the Cooperation Squares game, where those two boys got into an argument.
Yeah, Tucker and Roman. They disagreed about whether one was being disruptive. Instead of just punishing them, the teacher used it as a coaching moment.
Helping them use active listening and assertiveness.
Exactly. Teaching them how to state their own feelings and needs. Clearly, I feel frustrated when you talk while I'm trying to focus, without attacking the other person, and how to really listen to understand the other's perspective. Learning to navigate conflict constructively, not just avoid it or escalate it.
What other kinds of things do these curriculums cover?
Key components usually include deeper self-awareness, personal decision-making skills, applying EQ to real-life choices about things like peer pressure, drugs, sex, specific techniques for managing feelings like using positive self-talk, developing empathy, and concrete conflict resolution strategies, like that SOCS method mentioned.
SOCS, what's that?
It's a simple problem-solving framework. S, describe the situation. O, list your options. C, consider the likely consequences of each option. S, choose the best solution. It gives kids a structured way to think through difficult social situations instead of just reacting impulsively.
And does it actually work? Do these programs make a difference?
The results cited are pretty compelling. Schools that implemented these kinds of emotional literacy programs reported significant drops in problem behaviors. One principal saw suspensions for fighting plummet from 106 the previous year down to just 26 after the program started. Other studies showed these classes could cut the risk of major depression by half in kids who were already showing mild symptoms.
So this isn't just theory. It has tangible, positive outcomes. Hashtag tag outro.
Absolutely. I think when you pull it all together, the big takeaway from all this research is that emotional intelligence isn't some kind of secondary soft skill that's nice to have, but less important than traditional intellect.
Right, it's not just about being nice.
Not at all. It's a concrete, measurable set of abilities rooted in our neural wiring. These competencies, self-awareness, managing emotions, staying motivated, understanding others, handling relationships, effectively, they profoundly shape our lives.
It really feels like IQ might get you in the door, get you the interview maybe, but it's EQ that determines how well you do when you're inside. Whether you build relationships, navigate challenges, lead effectively, whether you ultimately thrive or just survive.
That sums it up well. When you look at the predictive power of something like the marshmallow test, a pure measure of impulse control being stronger than early IQ for later academic success, or the sheer life-extending impact of emotional support for cancer patients. The evidence is just overwhelming. EQ plays a massive role in determining our destiny, our health, our relationships, our career success, our overall happiness.
Yeah.
And so the material really leaves us with a powerful concluding thought, especially considering that troubling trend we discuss, the decline in emotional competence among young people worldwide.
The rising anxiety, depression, aggression.
Exactly. Given that crisis and given the proven effectiveness of these emotional literacy programs in schools, well, the sources pose a fundamental question for all of us, for society. Shouldn't we be making the teaching of these essential life skills a core part of every child's education? Shouldn't emotional literacy be just as fundamental as reading, writing, and arithmetic, especially now, more than ever?
That's definitely something to think about. It's a time we prioritize teaching kids how to understand and manage their inner world just as much as we teach them about the outer world, a crucial investment, perhaps, in everyone's future.